back to the Great Ojibwe Baking Show. I'm your host, Marissa Carr, the Great Ojibwe Baker. And if you watch the show, you might be looking around like, whoa, where are you, Marissa? This is not your kitchen. It looks very different. Well, today I am coming to you live and direct from my parents' kitchen in beautiful Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, you might also be like, wait, wasn't this show a secret from your parents? And yes, it was. Unfortunately, in October, someone who will not be named spilled the beans. So now they know I am home at my parents' house. Tomorrow's Easter. For dinner, well, for dessert after Easter dinner, we're having a coconut cake, and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna make it. So here we go. First, we're gonna start making the coconut custard filling that's going to go in between the layers of our coconut cake. And we're doing that first because it needs to chill for quite a while before we can put our cake together. So if we make it first, then we can pop it right in the fridge and let it chill while we bake our cake and do the other steps. So we're gonna start with 3/4 of a cup of whole milk and 3/4 of a cup of coconut milk. I use light coconut milk. Oh, hang on, my mom never remembers to take her phone with her. Anyway, we're gonna start with our 2 milks put together, and we're also gonna add, just to give it a little extra coconut kick, a tablespoon of coconut flavoring. And we're gonna whisk this together, and we are going to put it on the stovetop and bring it to a simmer. Now, while that's heating, we're gonna take 5 egg yolks. And when you separate your egg yolks, make sure to save the whites because we're gonna use those for the cake. And to our egg yolks, we're gonna add 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. There we go. 1/3 of a cup of sugar, and a 1/2 cup of flaked coconut. And I'm using unsweetened coconut, mostly because that's what my mom has a lot of laying around the house. However, you can really use any kind. You can use flaked sweetened coconut too, which is much more common at the grocery store. If you do that, just make sure to adjust your sugar accordingly. I would bring down the amount of sugar that I add so that this isn't overly sweet, and just whisk it together until it's nice and combined. Here is our heated milk mixture. It's nice and foamy, and I heated it over medium heat until it started to bubble up. You gotta stir it the whole time because if you don't, it can and will burn or scald. And now I'm just gonna add a little bit and whisk it into my egg mixture little by little. This process is called tempering, and the reason why we do this gradually is because if I just dump all of this hot milk at once into my egg mixture, I'm gonna end up with weird sweet scrambled eggs with coconut in them, and that is not delicious. So when we whisk this together gradually, it lets the milk really softly and gradually cook the eggs. We end up with a nice soft custard and not scrambled eggs, and you can see that this is coming together. It's really nice and liquidy. It's not scrambled, it's not curdling. That's exactly what we want. I'm gonna add a little bit more hot milk. Beautiful. That's great. So now I'm going to pour my egg mixture back into my hot milk. I'm gonna whisk the entire time. And now I'm gonna take this back to the stove, and whisking or stirring the entire time, I'm going to cook it over low heat just until it starts to bubble. You don't really want to cook it any longer than that for a couple reasons. One, it will continue cooking for residual heat from residual heat after you take it off the stove. And if you overcook it, you're going to end up with a kind of lumpy, grainy custard instead of something really nice and smooth and creamy, which is what we want. So I'm going to throw this on the stove and I'll check back with you guys when it's done. So you can see our coconut custard is really nice and soft and luscious. It's kind of loose right now, but that's okay. When it gets colder, it's gonna firm up a little bit. Let's see how it tastes. This is really hot, but I'm still gonna try a little bit. Yeah, that's gonna be delicious inside our cake. So now I'm gonna put this in a bowl, and I am going to cover it with plastic wrap, and I'm going to push the plastic wrap down onto the top of the custard so it's touching, and that's going to keep it from forming a skin. I'm going to throw this in the refrigerator, and then it's time to get going on my cake. Okay, time to get going on our cake. So I have the oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I'm going to mix together some cake flour, baking powder, baking soda, and some salt. And I'm just gonna whisk these guys together, get them nice and combined, get some air in this flour so it's not all lumpy and compacted together. And I'm gonna set it aside. Meanwhile, in the bowl of my stand mixer, I have a stick and a half of butter. And to that, I am going to add 1 2/3 cups of sugar, and I'm going to pop this on the stand mixer and let it mix until it's nice and creamed together. Great, that butter and sugar is creamed together really well, and I've told you guys before, if you don't have a stand mixer, you can totally do this with a hand mixer. You can get one at Target for like $8, and it'll do the job just fine. Although do make sure that your butter is at room temperature before you use a hand mixer, or it can really burn out your motor. Anyway, next I'm going to add the 5 egg whites that you saved when you were separating the eggs and the yolks for our custard. And I'm going to throw this back on the mixer. So I've mixed together the egg whites with our butter and sugar until they're nice and fluffy. And you can see if I dig into this with a spatula, it kind of leaves a trail. So we're not making angel food cake. We don't want to whip our egg whites to a meringue, which actually we couldn't do with this anyway because fat will prevent egg whites from forming peaks. But we do want to get it nice and fluffy and get some nice air in there because that's part of what's going to make our cake nice and fluffy. So now I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of sour cream. And for that nice coconut flavor again, I'm going to add a 1.5 tablespoons. This is not a precise measurement, you guys. Sorry, it's not science. Of coconut flavoring. And I'm going to throw it back on the stand mixer and mix all this together. Beautiful. So this is mixed together, and now I am going to take my dry ingredients that I set aside earlier and my coconut milk, which you can't see, it's right here, coconut milk, and we are going to alternate mixing them together. So first I'm going to take about 1/3 of my dry ingredients, toss it in there, and I'm going to put it back on the mixer. I've got that mixed in, so now I'm going to take 1/2 of my coconut milk, pour it in, and throw it back on the stand mixer. And we're going to keep doing this until we've mixed the flour in 3 parts and the coconut milk in 2 parts. So altogether it should be like flour, coconut milk, and then you're going to end with flour. So our batter has come together really nicely, following the procedure that I described. And something that I should mention is that when we mix our cake batter, we really want to mix it just enough to incorporate the ingredients. We want to mix it really as little as we can, especially with something powerful like a stand mixer or a hand mixer, because the more we mix it, the more gluten forms. And using cake flour helps. Cake flour has a lower protein content, which means that it forms less gluten, but we don't want to mix it any more than we need to. So the last step for our batter is, here I have a cup of flaked coconut. And this is the same unsweetened flaked coconut that I used before. I like it because the texture is a little finer, and also because we don't want our cake to be too sweet. You can certainly use sweetened flaked coconut as well. If you do, I would just reduce the sugar a little bit. And I'm not even putting this on the mixer because, like I said, I don't want to form that gluten. So I'm just going to fold it in nice and easy, really gently with my spatula. All right, that's looking really good. So here I have two 10-inch cake pans that I've prepared, and there are two ways to prepare a cake pan when you're baking a layer cake like this. First of all, you always want to cut a parchment round in the bottom. The traditional way to prepare a cake pan is to butter it and flour it, which you can certainly do. I was feeling kind of lazy today, so I used a baking spray that has flour in it, which kind of combines the two steps in one. You can do what works for you, but now we are going to fill our two cake pans, and we're going to try to fill them pretty evenly, right? We don't want one to have way more cake than the other. Now I'm using a 10-inch cake pan, honestly, because I'm at my mom's house and that's what she has. You could also use 3 8-inch cake pans. If you were to use a 9-inch cake pan, to be really honest with you guys, I am not sure whether you would be able to fill 3 or if you would want to do 2. But the great thing about baking is it's not life or death, right? And if you try it one way and you discover, oh, this actually needs to be in a different size cake pan, you can just take your batter out of one pan and put it in a different pan. My two cake pans are looking pretty evenly filled here, and I am going to put them in my oven that I've been preheating to 350 until a toothpick in the center comes out clean. While we're waiting for the cake to come out of the oven, I got a joke for you guys. Okay, what do you call the Easter bunny on a skateboard? Ojibwe meals on wheels. Our cakes are out of the oven, they're cooling. They ended up baking for about 22 minutes. But depending on the size of the pan that you use, you may need to adjust that time. So start low, you can always add more time. You can't take time off if you burn something. But while our cakes are cooling, we're gonna get going on our frosting. And for this cake, we're gonna make a basic cream cheese frosting, double batch. So in the bowl of my mixer, I have 2 sticks of butter softened to room temperature and also 2 blocks of cream cheese softened to room temperature. When you make this, you really want to make sure that you soften your cream cheese and your butter to room temperature, or this will become unnecessarily difficult. I'm going to throw this on my mixer and mix it all together. You can see that our butter and sugar are mixed together really nicely. So next, I'm going to add a whole 2-pound bag of powdered sugar. And you might be like, damn, that's a lot of powdered sugar. It is, but that's how you do it. That beep means my parents' mail just got here. Our frosting is mixed together, it's looking good. I'm gonna add a nice big tablespoon of vanilla extract and throw it back on the mixer. All right, and our frosting is all set. It's good to go. So now I'm gonna show you how we put the cake together. So you can see I have the first layer of my cake arranged on my cake place. Now, normally I would do what's called torting, which is when you cut a layer of cake through the middle so that it essentially becomes 2 layers in a layer cake. So since I baked 2 pans of cake, if I were to tort them both, I would have 4 layers in my cake. However, there are a couple things. One is that because I baked this cake in a 10-inch pan, it's pretty thin, so I could tort it like I had planned, but if I did, I would have really thin layers of cake. More importantly, my dad just walked through the kitchen and said, oh no, please don't tort the cake. I really prefer less filling rather than more filling. And you know, what the Kev wants, the Kev gets. So we're just gonna do a cake with 2 layers, and that's cool. So the first thing we do, you can see that I have put some of our cream cheese frosting in a piping bag. And we're gonna pipe So now that we've made our frosting dam, and I've stuck it in the refrigerator for a little bit, just to let it harden up a little bit, because we want to make sure that it holds up for the next step. So now we just take our filling and we start spooning it in here. Beautiful. So now that we've got our custard in here, we'll take our second cake layer and just place it right on top. So now the next step is that we have to frost this. And when we put a layer cake together, we don't want to throw all the frosting on at the beginning. First, we're going to put on what's called a crumb coat. And a crumb coat is a really thin layer of frosting that just kind of provides a base, catches all the crumbs. After we put on the crumb coat of frosting, we're going to throw it in the freezer for about 15-20 minutes, and then we can keep going. But an easy way to frost the sides of your cake, which is something that can often be difficult to do, is to use your piping bag, and you can just pipe around the sides like so. You can also pipe on the top. And then use your knife. I'm using a butter knife right now, but you can also use an offset spatula if you have one, or a cake turntable. And just ice nice and gently along the sides. And for your crumb coat, this is really as thick as it needs to be. It's not, you know, the point isn't to do like a full thick layer of frosting. We're just catching the crumbs and doing a base layer. All right, you guys, I've taken our crumb-coated cake out of the freezer, and let me tell you, when I was carrying it from the freezer, it was almost like my, I don't know, 10th or 11th birthday all over again. That was the year that my mom made me a birthday cake. She let me decorate it. I decorated the whole thing, and then carrying it from the kitchen table onto the countertop, I tipped the plate cake, or the cake plate, and the fully decorated cake tipped right onto the floor. Was that when I was 10 or 11, Mom?
I would say probably 10, 9 or 10.
Okay, 9 or 10, whatever. It was my birthday. It was quite a mess.
Yeah, we didn't have a birthday cake.
Anyway, I've got my crumb coat. So next, I am going to frost my cake. And when I frost a cake, I like to start with the sides, partly because the sides are, to me, the most difficult part to frost. The top is easy. The top's no big deal. And just like I did with the crumb coat, I'm using my piping bag to pipe icing onto the sides of the cake. If I had a turntable, I could use one. I don't have one here though, so I'm just piping onto the sides. And you can see then I can just go over with my knife, or if you have an offset spatula, you can use that too. And it's nice and easy to spread the icing out. You can see we've got a nice even layer of frosting all over our cake. So our last step is that because this is a coconut cake, we're gonna decorate it with shredded coconut. And for this application, unlike earlier, I'm using the sweetened flaked coconut mostly because I really like the look of the bigger flakes. Now I'm using the coconut as is out of the bag. However, if you want to, you can always toast your coconut before you apply it to the outside of the cake. So I am, what, Mom?
Or color it.
Or color it. You can also color your coconut, and I might have some colored coconut videos coming up in May. No promises, but stay tuned. Anyway, so you can just take a little coconut and just kind of pat it onto the side of the cake really gently. You want to be careful. What you don't want to do is end up with a palm full of frosting. But you do want to stick it on there. Don't worry if it spills onto the bottom of the cake plate. You can always dust it off and clean it up later, but for right now, we just want to pat it in so that it sticks and we get coconut all the way around. And here you have it, our finished coconut cake. Now, if you've watched other episodes of the show, you know that normally I like to end by tasting the thing that I baked. But since this is for dessert for Easter dinner tomorrow, I'm going to have to hold off. But I know it's going to be delicious. And if you want to hear how it went over, click subscribe, follow me on YouTube, and stay tuned for more updates. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Great Ojibwe Baking Show. Gego Abamininim.